This is Jackie Clement, Executive Director of the Fair Media Council. Thank you for joining us for today's session. This is our final day of the news conference, Real and Powerful. Today's morning session, which is moderated by Chris Wright, Managing Director of Protiviti and a board member of the Fair Media Council. Today, he is moderating Long Island Hyperlocal News Forecast 2022. And this event is sponsored by Northwell Health, Henry Schein, Protiviti, St. Joseph's College, the Bartow Law Firm, and Hofstra University. So we thank our sponsors for making this event possible. Joining Chris today for his panel discussion is Long Island Business News editor and associate publisher, Joe Dowd, Newsday managing editor, Don Hudson, HuntingtonNow.com editor and publisher, Pam Robinson, and Altice-USA Vice President of Digital News, Chris Vaccaro.
Thank you all for joining us. Thank you to Pam and Joe and Chris and Don for participating today in what we hope will be a very informative and interactive panel discussion on topics that should matter most to us, the hyper-local Long Island news environment. Those of us who are paying attention to hyper-local weather right now for fairly obvious reasons can appreciate the value of having that kind of focus on the news, whether it's weather or government. So we look forward to engaging in a discussion. The intro, the invite, if you will, indicated that we would be hearing about what issues, people, and events you'll be seeing and hearing from and about from the folks like Joe and Don and Pam and Chris and their organizations. And so I think we should just kick it off with that in mind, and perhaps maybe we can start with Don from a Newsday perspective, and I think also to the extent that you think Newsday TV is part of that. Feel free to bring us up to speed on what will Newsday, inclusive of or exclusive of the TV operation, be focusing on? Do you think is the big people, events, and stories of that are local for the coming year?
Well, we've our owner has a TV background, so we have placed a lot of emphasis on video. Without a doubt, Newsday Live TV. We have a lot of plans actually in the works right now. We're in the process of working through right now to get some new things launched here within the next month or so. So we're really looking forward to that. We're adding some more personnel. We're adding some more multimedia journalists. And our big push right now is digital, digital, just like everyone else. And we're doing a lot of webinars as well, too, as you guys have probably been following over the past year or two. And the big emphasis there, of course, is still on health and education and pocketbook issues. So in a nutshell, that's kind of where we are right now. Those are the biggest things. And of course, it's all about local, and, the topics that are really moving the needle. And for us, the ones that are moving the needle, first of all, is going to be breaking news. And then we have all of our education topics to cover, mostly K through 12 colleges, but mostly K through 12 transportation, all of our healthcare coverage, environment, all of our communities. In business, our big emphasis is on pocket issues, and sports. Preps is a huge driver for us, more so than pro sports. Features, the biggest thing for us is really all the restaurants, eateries, openings and closings, and that's what people love. And real estate, of course, is big for us as well. So that's kind of a nutshell of where we are as far as local.
So Don, does digital, you think, will that allow you to get more local? Is that really the plan? Maybe first person reporting from people with their own devices when you think about breaking news, or is it, or you're going to put more people out into the community, to cover local, or a mix of the both?
A little bit of a mix of both, actually. And, we're trying to get more TV journalists out in the field, without a doubt, as a part of some of our new initiatives.
Great, thank you. Chris, you may have some
in-studio stuff too, as well.
Sure, I would imagine. How is the staff enjoying working from the newer location? Is it closer to a highway than Pine Lawn Road, than the traffic on Pine Lawn Road would allow for getting local? Or
at our new facility, yeah. I mean, as much as we can get in there, I think everyone's enjoying it. I actually got a tour of it about a month or two ago for the first time. And I'll tell you, that studio is pretty impressive. I was extremely impressed.
As a full and fair, I was a payroll clerk as a summer internship at Newsday at 235 Pine Lawn Road in the summer of 1986, and came home smelling of newsprint and ink every night. So separating the processes probably is better for people's dry cleaning bills, if nothing else. So that's great. Chris, you may have following up on digital, given your role, any particular focus from a news content perspective or a how you'll do it that you care to share?
Yeah, well, covering just the News 12 and the broadcast landscape, within the confines of Altice, echoing a lot of what Don's saying. So obviously we're focused on health and safety just because of everything that's going on around us. I mean, that's inevitable from everywhere in the world, obviously, but we're really doubling down our efforts on consumer and, how it's impacting our wallets. And that's really, become at the forefront of our coverage, our digital coverage, sort of the multi-platform effort of polling and asking the audience for user-generated ideas about how it's actually impacted them, and then trickling those story ideas out onto broadcast, onto our streaming services, and all over our social pages. And that's going to impact our staffing and our reporter personnel and areas that we're enhancing. Weather, because of course, News 12 always has weather coverage, no matter if it's, light or what we're about to experience, which could be 9 inches or 24 inches, depending upon where you're living. And, we just get a ton of traffic and interest and ratings increases, and just, people tune in for that. The other piece is, just really harnessing our investigative reporting teams and building up those teams and building up those reporters. I think we have a lot of work to do in those areas, and that's been a commitment of news leadership to double down on those efforts from a staffing perspective and how that works from a multi-platform perspective. So between those core buckets, I saw the question, not just Q1, but really just the immediate, the long term as well, because I don't think those areas are going away. They're very impactful to the audience, and the data and the research that we have from our audience says they want more of it. So we're really trying to meet those demands.
Thanks, Chris. And Pam, super hyper local, given at least the apparent name of your organization, Huntington Now. You're kind of, there's a lot going on now in Huntington, right?
Yes.
Whether it's downtown village or even, a complete change up in town government, all your legislative lineup from a local government perspective, but anything particularly on your mind, and to what extent is it also sort of the downtown Main Street view as well?
Well, typically on Long Island, housing and zoning issues are really, really big, and they've really come to the forefront now in Huntington. We've been arguing for 43 years in Huntington, 43 years over one housing development, and it looks like it's finally going to go forward this coming year. We'll see. There's one last shot maybe that would stop it, but I think it's going to go forward finally. But there's also the county and the town signed a deal a couple of weeks ago to bring sewers to Huntington Station, and it's in an area that is now populated by mom and pop shops, and it's going to be very interesting to see what happens to those if a bigger developer wants to come in and knock them out. Now, that's not going to happen this year, but there's I think there's an inclination to let some of these projects go forward after several have been stymied. So those are all big issues. Honestly, on a hyper-local level, and Chris and Joe can tell you, crime is a biggie. But what really drives me crazy is the slightest restaurant news goes berserk. I had a little story about a McDonald's closing down temporarily and then reopening in April. It was the top story on my site for 3 days, and not because the other stories weren't of interest. People just wanted to know. So anytime there's a new business coming in, anytime, but particularly restaurants, people go crazy. So it's crime, restaurants, any development issues, and of course, politics. I think politics is still a big question mark as to what's going to happen. We had 2 councilmen elected who come in from really outside, very different kinds of backgrounds, and what their impact will be. New supervisor. There's going to be, I think, a lot of changes in Huntington, but what they are, I wouldn't predict.
So you and Don both mentioned restaurant openings. I know the Wright family was very pleased to know that you can get Maroni meatballs in Southold now when you're on the North Fork. It's a smaller location, but you don't have to go to Northport to deal with the traffic. So it was the biggest news for a week in one particular household anyway. It was a big deal. So I think it's also because people tend to know the owners. It's a local. Everything becomes a neighborhood eatery at some level.
Mhm.
So how is that? And clearly you've run the gamut from a size and scale perspective. Is it radically different, partially different, a continuum from, say, Patch or Newsday in terms of how you're going about it? Is
Are you
it?
talking to me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, of course, it's very different. Digital, some print translates to a certain point on digital, but your standards and ideas of what are news change a little bit, I think, on digital because of what people want to read. You want to keep to your ethics and your standards of what is news, but you are kind of forced into, oh, I'll play up this McDonald's story today because everybody's reading it. I think print people are able to, like I said, maintain standards. People with print background, we're able to say, no, we're not going to chase every little silly story. But we also are aware that that's where our readers are. So we do have to go after them. So yeah, I've been, when I was at Newsday, I was an editor and I ran a training program. So I wasn't a reporter there. So you running Huntington now is a little different. I've actually had to learn and meet a lot of people that I didn't know, even though I'd lived here for years. So they're comparable, but not really. So.
Thank you. And so, Joe, obviously, not hard to figure out where your area of focus is based on the name of your publication. But any particular areas that are going to be of interest, again, predictive at this point, or a focus from a future perspective in the business world for you?
Well, the economy. There are some major things going on that need to be covered and need to be explained to a high-end business audience and the other people who want to know what's going on in business on Long Island. I think it was Don who mentioned that obviously real estate is a major focus on Long Island. It is a big deal. And Pam mentioned that there is a housing project that after, 500 years now?
43.
43. Okay, I was just a little off. After 43 years, it may actually go through that there's going to be a housing project in Huntington.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's crazy, but that's Long Island.
Mm-hmm.
We have seen this here since my days working at Patch when I returned to Long Island, how crazy people are about real estate and not in my backyard.
Mm-hmm.
We saw opposition to projects that make no sense, the opposition. And we saw politicians cave kind of pressure, even though they have no opponents. So my point is the economy will be a major story to our local audience. It'll be a major impact on the coming elections, the congressional elections. Inflation is a monster. The New York Times ran a story on its front digital page yesterday into today that talked about how the Biden administration is overseeing the largest growth in the economy, jobs and everything else in years, something. And he's getting no benefit of it. And the reason is because people do not feel safe. You add the pandemic, the empty shelves, and the inflation, and you get nervous people, frightened people, even food insecure people. It starts to make people wonder. My audience is not one; they're not the ones wondering about that. My audience is a high-end business leaders in the community, some of the biggest movers and shakers. But I think that this story of the economy is going to be the biggest story of the year, without doubt, unless something breaks nationally or internationally that is bigger.
Great. And I think you mentioned, and Pam as well, it's sort of one of those stories that's at the nexus of environmental, government, and business. Simple thing like sewers, right? They're arguably a good thing for the environment, better than everyone having a cesspool. But what they do allow is for increased population density, which then could change zoning, which could enable a contentious project or put a bigger store that would put a smaller store out of business, right? And so the nuance gets a little bit interesting. And we'll just go around on this. How do you feel about your reporters being able to sort of know enough of the local issues to be able to put a story like that together that's got moving parts? Maybe,
That's
you
Great
know,
question.
right.
Great
So
question.
Pam,
Yeah.
go for it, Pam. You spoke first. You go first. So like,
I
how do
was
you get to go deep enough?
I gotta say, and this is no knock on my freelancers. I don't have a staff. I just have freelancers. They are in a couple categories. They either have an interest like they want to write about pets, or they want to write about, some other issue that they're involved in. I don't have people who want to go sit at a zoning board meeting. I just don't have them. And so either I do that. And the other thing is I was out at Stony Brook a couple months ago, ran into some great kids from Stony Brook. But their interest is they want to do the barn burner. They want to do climate change resolution kinds of stories. And so again, to tell them that what really matters is that big, project to put houses on a golf course that gets hundreds of people upset. They don't want to hear about that. They don't have the depth of knowledge, and it takes a long time. So I don't have a solution to how you get qualified people to do that unless somebody like me does that kind of stuff, and I have the freelancers do all the fluff that fills out the pages around that. So I'll yield to anybody who's got a solution to that problem.
I have a couple of thoughts. From a News 12 perspective, when I was mentioning, we're enhancing the staffing around consumer and investigative, and really that's a small area of, we are enhancing beats. We need the reporters to focus on their beats. I think Newsday's reporters do an outstanding job of owning their beats. They have more even specific niche focus reporting areas, and so there needs to be more of that for people to understand how to harness story pitches, build sources, like some of the basics of journalism. And we're hiring people that have experience in some of those areas, like I said, consumer investigative, and some others across. Remember, it's not just News 12 Long Island. News 12 has a network with Hudson Valley, Westchester, Brooklyn, Bronx, Connecticut, and Jersey. So different beats, different regions, are being added and adjusted. From a talk about higher education, journalism education. I also run the graduate journalism program at Hofstra, where I went. In the last 2 years, we built a specialization, and this all relates. That's not a pitch for Hofstra, although it's wonderful, and they are sponsoring this, which I didn't realize.
Chris, I wouldn't be here if not for Hofstra. That's where my parents met.
Yeah,
So.
Perfect. See, it's amazing. It's the Harvard of Long Island. That's what I refer to. So we built into specializations for community journalism and investigative journalism for the students to learn those tactics and traits to become better reporters in those areas, on how to tell stories from a local perspective, on how to really harness, Freedom of Information Act requests, and do that so that when they get to this level where we're talking about how do they become better local reporters, hopefully they have a couple of years of that under their belt from our program. So I think it's always a work in progress to make sure that reporters have the skills and the dedication and the time and sort of the resource management to get the best journalism done.
Yeah, it's not helpful that, for example, I serve on the NIFA board as a volunteer, and it's probably not helpful for us to be having night meetings, although that was meant to allow people to attend, but the reporter needs to file, right? So has to sit there and maybe file, I've seen them tweet to themselves to keep it active and then be able to push it out next morning. So you can see time is a big issue too, but in terms of the ability to go deep. I know Joe and Don, you probably have thoughts on this continuing topic too. So maybe Joe.
I'm still stuck on the Harvard of Long Island, Chris. I'd be stuck
I've been
on
saying it for years. Yeah.
Well, but see, Adelphi,
wow.
I think Adelphi used to use that in their ads. That was
Yes,
an
they did.
Adelphi ad. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
Harvard was the Adelphi of
Long Island. Yeah.
Boston or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or
I
Long
see.
Island, right, yeah.
Okay. Really, what was the question? Where are we?
How making sure your reporters are able to really dig deep enough to connect the dots for the readers.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm lucky on Long Island, and also with my other staff in Oklahoma. I run the Oklahoma newspaper, which is sort of a trend now. It's a business paper too. I am blessed with really solid reporters who will come up and understand the importance of a zoning meeting or a Board of Commissioners meeting they have there. And it's good because I don't have to explain to them why this is important. They know to cover it rather than me telling them it's important to cover. So I'm lucky that way. The bigger trend to me in the industry is I don't know how we're going to be able to train the next generation. And the next generation is coming in under very different circumstances than we collectively came in, although, you know, I'm the oldest one here, clearly. And, you know, back then we had typewriters. It was really cool. You should see it. We had hot type. People don't even know what hot type is anymore. So it was a different world, and it was, and the world that we live in is dramatically different. I think digital comes, the way it's going to go is it'll be digital first, no matter what. And the days of the newspaper, the actual thing you hold, are limited.
Mhm.
May not be in our lifetime. It may last for 50 years. Who knows? In some markets. But I think the generation right after us and the generation two after the millennials, my kids, my daughters, they don't read newspapers. They read it online. They read it on the phone. They are into the news. And by the way, they both watch Patch. They love Patch because it's so hyper local. You can get the drunk driving arrests in Oyster Bay, which is important to them. So I think that's going to be going forward.
And Don, you know, from a Newsday, you know, print and TV perspective, any thoughts on how that's going to go, or how it's going in terms of making sure the reporters can really help connect the dots?
Well, like Joe said also too, and some of the things that Chris said, we're very fortunate because we have a lot of experience on our staff. So from an environmental standpoint, being able to cover those tough issues, I have reporters who actually have that expertise and can break that down. And then, on our investigations team in particular. So what I'm having them to do also too is basically train up. I have, you know, my towns reporters, some who are very ambitious, some who like to stay in their particular areas and not looking to advance, and they just love what they're doing. But I have some who are very ambitious and they want to move on to other topics. I have one in particular who's interested in the environment. So that's perfect. She's the next one I'm going to grow along those lines. I have the next person who's interested in covering higher. So I'm trying to grow the younger people within our room. And we're fortunate to be able to hire folks, you know, that have a little experience when they come here to begin with. So that always helps.
And I guess, there's a business reality too, right? The constraint may be the ability to hire enough people. I think I heard a little bit about maybe the inventory of people to hire too, maybe the training. Are any or all of you spending money on training, or is that, it's big in my business, right? But you know, I'm an accountant. I deal with SEC investigations, so you know, we train people for particular uses and purposes. But is that a major cost for you, or a major area of focus for any of you?
100%. It's very important, from staff morale to making sure that their professional development is in check, to making sure that we're hammering home the idea of emerging trends in media, and to stay, if not ahead, at least on pace with the correct way to be doing reporting on multiple platforms. And the only way to do that effectively, especially with, you know, we're talking about a network with about 400 employees, we have to make sure they're trained. And so we have, if not weekly, bi-weekly, monthly training sessions. I mean, and it could be specific on writing. It could be specific on social, and it could be specific on video editing or graphics for social. I mean, we have a full calendar where we look at it and go, that's actually too much training. We have to balance this out because someone has to do it. And a lot of it actually falls on us internally to do the training, but we do invest a bit of our budget into, you know, with people from Pointer, specific folks in the broadcast industry coming down to help us. We're fortunate that our general manager, who's new with us in the last couple of years, he worked for a consulting firm for years after he was a news director at multiple stations. And he, you know, it was his business to consult and engage on training at broadcast outlets across the country. And he infuses that in all of us. It's the only way to, you know, buck some of these trends and make sure that everyone's on the same page. So it's vital for the individual and the organization's growth.
I echo what Chris is saying there too, in terms of training. It's vital, it's important. We do it every day. We do a lot of it internally and we do it externally as well. But one thing I wanted to mention, one of the toughest things for us right now as an organization, and I'm sure you guys are experiencing as well too, it's tough to recruit during a pandemic. You know, when you're hiring people over Zoom, you know, you never met them face to face. I'm sorry, that's one of my health reporters trying to reach me, which I'll probably need to take in just a second because it may have something to do with that masking thing in Brooklyn today, the hearing. Anyway, it's key for us to be able to recruit people, but it is not easy. It's never really been easy, but it seems like it's much tougher right now in terms of recruiting and getting good people on your staffs, especially management. You know, and then even trying to convince people internally to move into management. You know, reporters are like, no, I don't want to touch that. But I'll let you guys take it from there, Joe. Pam.
Yeah, I wish I had the opportunity to do some of that because that's one of the things that I did at Newsday was training. But I belong to a group called LIBN, Local Independent Online News, and their training extends to the key person from the organization. And they work with Google, they work with Pointer, a bunch of other places. And unfortunately, you know, you allow your schedule to get in the way of actually taking a lot of advantage of that opportunity. One thing I am noticing, I'm curious as to where people are, is that the push lately seems to be to newspapers in particular to go more to data journalism and away from the day-to-day, you know, quick hit kinds of stories. I'm curious as to what other people think about that, because that's in line with training as well. Who's got a data reporter available? I certainly don't.
Great. Thank you for talking amongst yourselves during a brief technical interlude.
Yeah, I figured we would just keep going. If you never came back, we'd figure it
Yeah,
out.
that's fine. Sorry. Go ahead.
Pam was throwing another question out to the group just about, you know, data-driven journalism. It's a commitment. It's a resource commitment. I mean, it's one of those things where you need, and Newsday has a few of those folks that can crunch those numbers on their investigative team. And I always look at some of their projects and I'm like, we don't have that. We don't have someone to sit there and go and do that, let alone, even if you have the numbers and the reporting is really good, numbers being broad scope of whatever type of data that you're analyzing and crunching, you really need engineers to manifest how that looks, how that feels, what is the data table that's built. So there's a real commitment on how to make that happen. And we do it internally on a very small basis sometimes if we have the numbers that the investigative team can give to us, but it's difficult. I mean, it's a, for lack of a better term, it's a resource commitment that, you know, if you have the people, great, but you also need to make sure they do the job and it's effective to show the numbers and so that the audience and the viewers understand it. You know, there's so much info out there.
Yeah, Chris, and I agree. I have Matt Clark who crunches all of the COVID numbers for us. I mean, he's just basically, the guy's incredible. And I just actually hired another data reporter, and then we're looking to hire one more. So we're investing in that part of it because people are really interested in these numbers and to be able to crunch these numbers and to be able to see and provide that analysis.
So is that a catch-up class for everybody who's graduated after a certain date? And also, I guess, you know, the simple, maybe it's more of my perspective for what I do every day, but does that change, you know, how you train people to evaluate what's actually real evidence versus, you know, data they found? Is it, you know, like the verification process, the quality of evidence, if you will, if you're looking for evidence to fact check a story or sort of, or is that it's more technical, like how to get data, how to use the app, but is there also an element of how do you know that's real and not from some bogus website?
It's a great question.
Yeah, that is a really good question.
Yeah.
I mean, the credible sources, I mean, when we follow a lot of our information in order to be able to crunch the numbers that we do crunch. For instance, our COVID stuff, it comes from the state, you know, we say up there, I mean, it comes from credible sources.
Excellent. So let's talk about an issue, a hyper-local issue, and perhaps one that might become more controversial than it typically would be. A question came in through the chat, and a few of you mentioned schools as the issue. And I think the dynamic this year, you know, I'm wondering if you're thinking it's going to be more of a story or you're going to have to cover it differently because it may be more about whether the Moms for Freedom are running a candidate for school board in the district versus the usual, is the budget within or above the 2% cap? Any views on how you plan on approaching schools as a topic this year, and how it might be different than perhaps it's either been recently or ever?
Well, just the content areas all blend together. So it may be education at large, but it's really education with health and safety, education with the economy, education with freedom of speech and democracy. So it actually just adds and enhances the ability for outlets to tell different stories instead of like, yeah, there's a 2% tax hike. Let's get the perspective of the board president. You know, those stories have been there for forever in many ways. This allows for a great breadth of content. And, you know, you just have to look at it from a lot of merging knowledge bases. So you have to know more than just the educational landscape. So the people, the reporters and the editors assigning and writing those stories really have to know how to tell them. And in relation to a taxpayer or a parent or someone that just lives in the community that gets angry as a taxpayer with no kids, you know, there's all those perspectives that never go away from hyperlocal. But the stories are, you know, they're part of this ridiculous news cycle that we're all living, and it's not ending anytime soon. This is the new norm.
I'm curious your thoughts on that, Pam.
Yeah,
It's almost overwhelming. I could double my staff of one, and I wouldn't have enough time to do certain things. Education to me is a really important one, particularly this year. We have seen political movements come in. We've seen really angry people. Now, some of this predated COVID. Some of this anti-mask, anti-vaccine predates COVID, and they're very, very intense. And we're seeing in other parts of the country, people with political agendas on both sides, I think, being elected to school boards. So I think this fighting over education policy isn't going to go away by any means. The problem I have there are 8 school districts in the town, within the town of Huntington. In the last year and a half, I spent almost all my time trying to do some variation of a COVID story, all day long. And so education's kind of gotten away from me. We also have the problem of certain institutions not wanting to give out information unless they absolutely have to. They'd much rather tell us about the kid who got the award for 3rd grade finger painting than tell us what's really going on and why they had to shut down, a building or whatever. So education requires an intense commitment, in my opinion, to do it properly. And I think Newsday's in the position to do it. Maybe some others feel like they're in the position to do it. But education, I think, is clearly where, on Long Island, that's where your taxes go. And even if my daughter graduated years ago from high school, so I'm happy to pay the taxes that I pay. But at some point, I want to have more accountability coming from all the districts to say, what are you doing and why is this happening this way? So there's a movement right now, by the way, again, for the schools to not raise taxes this year. They've gotten a lot of state aid. So what's going on there? Explain that, what is going on? And I think fundamentally what people don't understand, the reason budgets go up is because of pension costs, general retirement costs. So there's a lot of explanatory material. Newsday's got the horses to do it. Maybe somebody else does. I don't. So it tends to be a little bit more superficial.
and there's a nexus to business there, right?
Yes.
I watch the pension rates for reasons of my volunteer world because they affect Nassau County's budget.
Mhm.
The stock market drives that because it's a rolling 5-year average that sets the pension rate. Now, it's not, they're not just in stock, right? They're in other types of investments, but broadly speaking, the market, if you will, drives that. And does any of this, including the potential for controversy, Joe, have you sending people to school board meetings this year, or is it, you're going to be doing that, or is it more covering it from the business angle, do you think?
I certainly, having covered school board meetings throughout my career, I hope to never go to another school board. And I would never send my poor business staff to a school board meeting unless they actually were going to,
There.
something.
Yeah.
But let me just address a couple of these issues from experience. Pam raises a couple of great points. Okay. One is that if we don't start suing these people for public information with really angry lawyers on the side, we're not going to get anywhere, because this is not just a school board issue.
Mhm.
This issue goes across the board.
Yes.
The White House.
Yep.
Okay. both White Houses, the last two White Houses, this one and the last one, they're lying to us openly. They are keeping back information. We need to sue, we need to put it on the front page, and we need to advocate for a free and unfettered press. If we don't do this, we're going to lose it. And it is actually a risk not only to our industry, but to democracy. That might sound high-minded. I don't think so. I think it's actually quite a real prospect that if we don't start doing things as an industry, we're going to die as one together. I've seen so many changes in this business over the last 40 years now, 41 in March. I'm not going anywhere. I have no plans to retire, but I'm hoping that I'm still be able to cover a school board meeting and the news events from the White House in some form of a free press. And I'm not sure I'm going to make it. So that's one big issue related to this. To me, we have to do it. We need the money people in our industry to understand what's at stake. And I hope they're listening, you know, in not just to this, but to the voices of so many who say, got to do something about this. This cannot stand.
Joe, I'm totally with you.
Maybe that's going to leave it there. I'm sorry, Don, please.
No, I'm totally with you on that too, because we find ourselves fighting these school districts over and over again for the simplest of information. And, you know, of course, you know, they delay it. They have all these delay tactics. They have attorneys on staff that know how to play the game. I'm not even going to get into some specifics, but we have 2 lawsuits actually that we're prepared to file right now against districts. It's just simple information that they just won't give up.
Yep.
You see that at
And
town
so
boards? Yeah.
It's a fight. You know, we have 124 school districts that on this island. We're covering public schools, and it's impossible. I have 6 education reporters, and it's so much stuff jumping off every day. I'm still trying to figure out how to move one person from one story to the next. It's almost impossible to keep up with because of all of the school districts, and it's news every day. That's how people want to know.
A corollary to that, in my opinion, is social media, where more and more institutions are putting their own information onto social media, leading a lot of people to believe that that's the whole story. I've had people argue with me. Well, so-and-so said it's this. I said, well, here's the whole story. Here's the other part of what they didn't say to you. And I don't have time to fight that battle, and yet I have to fight it every day. So I think we're talking about education. It's true of a lot of institutions, but it's real obvious to me with schools what I don't know why it is. I just had this discussion with somebody earlier this week. I said, I know you're not trying to be, you know, cover things up, but it looks that way when you won't tell me this very basic thing. You know, and I don't know what this, I like Joe's idea of foils. I may start practicing my foil skills because that's, unfortunately, I feel foils always seem a little aggressive to me, but I may have to go that route because this is just crazy.
Well,
Yeah,
it
but
does seem like,
they tell us that. I mean, they basically tell us up front.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
well, it makes it hard. It makes it hard to be real time and breaking news if somebody's running out the clock on a foil.
Yes.
Yeah, and I'll give you an example. We were looking for a personnel file here recently, a principal who had been reassigned. And by the time we got the foil back, which was yesterday, he had already been placed back in the position he was in previously.
And I'll tell you,
that doesn't feel like an accident. The timing does not feel like an accident.
It was a stall tactic until they finished the investigation.
Right.
And Don, you raised another good point, and you've got 6 reporters covering 6 on 124. That's a pretty high ratio, but all 124 matter. I'll give you an example. I live 2 blocks from the line of a school district. In fact, 2 blocks away, one side of the street is in one's in the other. My school district, it doesn't even have its own zip code. It's not a, and it adjoins one that also doesn't have its own zip code, right? But the taxes are radically different on one side of the street than the other because of whatever industrial base. So if you looked at my zip code, you would think that it would matter more to me what the Levittown School District is doing, but it's the Island Tree School District, right? And so the ability to be local is the only way to be relevant because of how many school districts you have. And I don't do staff deployment in media, but it seems like 6 to 124 is a pretty high ratio.
That's tough.
Or Pam,
one
1 to
cover-
8, right?
Let's do 5 because
Yeah.
one covers higher ed.
Right.
Oh.
Right. And Pam's got 1 to 8, right? Just in Huntington. So,
Yeah, which is crazy. And so you wind up dropping off and hitting only the most, the newsiest, most recent, and frankly, in some cases, easiest thing to write,
Right.
Schools closed because the buses aren't running because of COVID, whatever, So it doesn't lend itself to the kind of in-depth local coverage you'd like by any means.
But staffing has always been the
Mhm.
challenge.
Yes.
Forever, probably dating back to the guys who wrote the Bible, okay? When they were covering that.
they only have the 12, right? Just the 12.
They only had 12 of them, and they had to cover everything, resurrections, we're talking about,
Being
second,
kind, yeah.
all of that. And I think that that was always a challenge, no matter what you had. I mean, Don, you never had 126 education board. What would be a number that would work? I don't know. I know I don't have enough people, and I say that with sadness. I wish I did. I have. I know I have enough people to write a really competent report on local business, but to do the stuff that I would like to do, I'm not sure I have them, and I think that's our challenge now going forward.
So Joe, while you're speaking, I'll ask Chris to weigh in too. You mentioned that you've covered the logically contiguous areas of Long Island and Oklahoma City.
Yes.
Chris from a News 12 perspective is probably, he mentioned, the Hudson Valley, the New Jersey. Sometimes we turn it on, we'll see the Jersey Morning Report on a Saturday morning, for example.
Mhm.
To what extent is what you have to do on Long Island different, better, harder than it is because you have that other frame of reference? Is it different on Long Island, and if so, harder or easier? Like what insight can you give to the folks who are trying to figure out how it's done here? Because you've got that other comparison. Maybe Joe, compared to Oklahoma, Chris, then to the rest.
The size of the geography for Long Island is pretty massive, but then you look at News 12 New Jersey and they cover the entire state. And of course, if Long Island was a state, it would be like the 12th biggest state. So it's not like it's almost like apples to apples. But then Hudson Valley and Westchester is a sliver. But then Brooklyn and Bronx, it's in New York City, which has its own challenges and is just, sort of a megaphone of different issues, including, some of the biggest crime stories and conflict stories, because there's so many people in a tight area. So I think the challenges are kind of the same. As we're evolving our staff and our product, we look at that from a network perspective. A lot of the coverage is regional. Sometimes it's not hyper local in every single sense, because we can't cover all the school districts effectively. We can't cover every single municipality effectively. So it's really what's happening that day and the resources that we can define for investigative or a larger feature story. Maybe they have a little bit more wiggle room, a little bit more time to do a larger story. But across the network, the challenges are the same. The strengths in many cases are the same. In some cases, we have some veterans that are a little bit deeper plugged into their communities. That helps. In some cases, like News 12 Long Island is really the biggest of the legacy brands, because the other regions are younger. They may be 15 years old, 20 years old versus 35 or 36 years old. So it's a little bit different. And then the Brooklyn Bronx effect, they're competing with the New York City broadcast stations too. So there's a different element there of who's tuning in, and stepping out of the geography and talk about, emerging trends. I mean, we're really big on harnessing the idea of OTT, over the top streaming, and putting News 12 on a ton of distribution partners across the country, so that we're actually expanding our footprint and our DMA beyond the walls of the tri-state. And so we've seen that audience grow unbelievably, faster and quicker than we could ever imagine. And so that plays into, you talk about how we're covering this region, but people care about this region outside of here because of the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut transplants that are all over the country. So we have these, what I thought was an experiment over 2021 is now a very big growing piece of our business as we expand the storytelling and the digital footprint. So it's interesting, kind of how your question stemmed growth, audience development in the grand scheme of how we're doing news.
And to some extent, efficiencies that may provide you the money to spend on some of the hyperlocal stuff too. You would imagine if you're sharing a common back office or platform.
Yeah, well, yeah, the workflows are very much shared. From the streaming perspective, like it's my digital team doing the production, so it wasn't an investment in additional people, believe it or not. It's more about an investment in some of the technical pieces and evolving the people to say, okay, what's working and what's not? What can we remove from the day and what's not? And is it going to work over a long period of time? It has. We checked that box. Now we're looking at, okay, in order to expand, where do we enhance and invest the resources? And it's been a wildly fun, modern way of trying to get our message and our branding out there that we weren't even thinking about that when I first started with the company a few years ago. And so, that those are things that excite me. You talk about like local news. Yeah, the stories are great, but I'm really involved in the platform development too, because people got to get it somewhere.
Yeah. Joe, Oklahoma, anything major different? Are you running it sort of a mirror image, or is it entirely different? Or
It's a great question because I'm not sure. What I do in Oklahoma is vastly different because
Yes.
Oklahoma is vastly different than here. Yesterday, the state of Oklahoma thought it was fitting to execute a human being with lethal injection, something that in New York we think is cruel and unusual and barbaric. There was a case recently there, and not to go off topic, but basically they are different than us. Okay, it is a different world. They still think that some of the values that were held 40 and 50 years ago still count. And when I say they, I'm painting a very broad brush, the majority there. Their governor is an ideologue who looks at the world the way Donald Trump did, or he is a sycophant. It's a strange place to cover business in because the business community tends to be conservative. They tend to be, looking toward future growth and development, and they don't want to hear about their problems in a lot of ways. So sometimes in Oklahoma, you have to explain why their problems are important to them, even if they don't know. It's a different operation because it's a 5-day-a-week daily.
oh, okay.
They gave it to me because they ran out of editors, I think, is pretty much what happened.
Great, thank you. And Pam, in a more minor way, I mean, is there any need to distinguish, or do you often find between huntingtonvillagenow.com and Town of Huntington, Deer Park, Center Park, Northport, or is it pretty clear to your audience what they're reading, what they're looking for? Is it all of Huntington, or Huntington as we drive through it?
I primarily try to, what I consider downtown Huntington, South Huntington, that area. And I catch up. There's always stuff going on in Northport. Northport fascinates me. I just don't have the staff to get over there as much as I'd like. And I just, kind of skip around. If going by school district, Harbor Fields, Half Hollow Hills, scoot around the edges there. Very once in a while, Cold Spring Harbor. But it's basically what I consider central Huntington is my primary interest. And that's
Don,
where it comes in from as well.
Right. Thank you. And Don, you're obviously curating everything, right? You've got everything from AP feeds to, it's a full-size global, national, local newspaper. So I assume that's that creates some interesting dynamics from a probably space allocation perspective. Like when does the local story make the front page and the national story on a Supreme Court vacancy make the 8th page, where in another market it might be on the front page?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting, the process, I would say, during the day and in the afternoons, having those differing opinions when we discuss what's going to be on page one. I would say sometimes it really comes down, a lot of times it comes down to the last moment. And it'll be either myself or my co-managing editor making the decision on it. So, but we try to get input and feedback, and we're trying to think from a reader perspective, why would people care about this tomorrow? And sometimes I'm quite surprised myself at some of the things we put on page one because I'm new to the market. So in my previous market, I didn't think this would have played very well, but here it's a different story.
But
I'm still learning this market myself after 3 years, and will probably be forever learning it.
I'll keep you in mind as I go to the curb every morning for my copy.
Thank you. Hey, I
Great.
did want to address one thing I think you have in the chat session
Okay.
here about cyber attacks, but I
Yes.
want to address the cyber attacks from a school district perspective, because I want to go back to covering schools again too. And there have been quite a few school districts actually that have been attacked here on Long Island as well as statewide. And we went after those numbers. We went after actually all the information we possibly could in one particular school district, which kept delaying us, kept fighting us. So we ended up foiling the State Department of Education. And we ended up getting everything on
Really?
every school district here on Long Island as well as statewide. So that's cyber attacks is huge. And there are more districts on Long Island that were attacked that have never been reported.
Huge and sensitive, right? Because if
Wow.
you report on a cyber event, you may want to, they may not want you to disclose enough to let the next one be more effective. right?
Exactly. So, I mean, we're working on a story on that right now too. But I mean, it's interesting. Some picked up, some didn't.
Well, we think in a lot of ways, that cyber attacks, okay, that the real issue here is that we don't have a defense for them. I mean, if somebody was
Yeah.
robbing banks, we do have a defense for it. We have cops and stuff and the FBI, right? We have cyber attacks. Is there someone fighting this? And I've asked techies this and they say, no, nothing.
If you are hacked, the U.S. Secret Service comes to visit you. That's the
Yes.
agency to see you first.
Really?
Wow.
So I think that's a great. So, and Don, maybe that's a segue. I'm going to start with you, and as we get close to the end of the hour here, ask each of you, what is the big story that you think will be next? What is next year? What is this? It's not next year, it's this year. What is this year's big story if you had to pick one?
Well, I mean, for us, obviously, it's still the healthcare crisis because it consumes us every day because of the changing nature of it. So I'll be honest, I'm laser focused on that across all platforms and across all sections, how it's still affecting us on a daily basis. So that to me is still the story and it's still going to play out for a long time.
Which will have derivative stories of an unnumbered amount, right? That's
Yes.
Which is-
Oh, no doubt. No doubt.
Chris. How about yourself from a News 12 perspective or from an Altice perspective?
Yeah, it's health and safety, it's consumer, and it's weather. So it's a proliferation of all three of those things, but especially how is the economy being affected? How is your wallet being impacted? Is a story that is increasingly eye-opening, probably for all of us, and I know for everybody on this island. And then you can't lose sight of the midterms coming up and the red wave that they talk about and the political structure changing and shifting. And look what Nassau County at the executive seat and Balone, his term ending. That's a big story. That also obviously has undertones related to the economy from a local perspective and health and safety and how they handle it. But yeah, it's a combination of consumer, COVID, and this increasingly important political year.
And in the local, hyper-local sense, probably redistricting will be more of a story here than it otherwise would be. When you think about what's going to happen with the Long Island congressional map, right? Do they split the Forks in Suffolk, and go that way? What happens with the open third district? Does it push more into Queens, more into Suffolk, south into Nassau? The part that Meeks has in Western Nassau, does that go on to Queens? Who gets that? So I think normally you would think that might be a dull story, but I think we have 5 members of Congress and 4.5, if you will, depending on how you count it. But the lineup might change because of it. So
Big year.
Pam, how about yourself?
What I said earlier, basically, on a really local level, it's always about housing, zoning, what businesses are coming into town. That's like a continuing story with moments that the story really flares up. I agree on the redistricting, by the way, because our third congressman is trying to run for governor. And there have been people running to take that seat since the day after the 2020 election. I mean, that's how people, whether they're going to be successful or not, we'll see. But that seat is in hot contention. But we also have the Suffolk legislature redistricting, which is apparently Balone has vetoed the Democratic plan. It's not clear to me if he actually did that. And, He's working out a deal with the Republicans. So how that's going to reshape redistricting, like you say, it's a topic that doesn't catch a lot of interest day to day, but it's a really important one because Huntington under the Democratic plan would have lost the legislative seat. Whether the Republicans come back and do the same thing, I don't know. So there's a lot going on, and that is tied into zoning and housing issues. There's a lot of connection there. So that's what I'm watching for.
Thank you. And Joe, bring it home.
Well, from Long Island business news perspective, real estate is going to be a big thing, right? But also, I think from the economy side, bigger picture, inflation and what's done to control it vis-a-vis the Fed, particularly. If the Fed decides to increase interest rates, I think what you'll see is a ripple effect across the board. And it'll affect everybody, and it'll be including real estate, but it'll also affect everybody right down to the 2022 elections. If inflation isn't curbed, you're going to have issues with that. Give an example. I mean, inflation is, one of these things that you go to the shelves and you can actually see what's going on. Like last week, I bought a thing of coffee. It was $9.99, and now it costs $11.99. It was a week ago. Now that's whatever that is. I don't do math in my head, but whatever that is not the rate of inflation. Yeah. Gas prices took me $40 yesterday to load up my car from empty, but nonetheless, I got a little car. The big picture, that's affecting people. They go, that's weird. People on Long Island, a lot of them have the money to do this, but it tells them something isn't right. I think that's going to be big. And there's one last thing I'd bring up, and that is the environment. If you talk to my kids or anybody in the millennial generation, they want to see change in federal policy. They also want to see global policy, and many businesses are, in fact, responding to this in ways that are below the radar for lots of big newspapers. And I'm talking about the wind farms that we're putting in the New York Bight. That's the waterway between New Jersey and Long Island. Some of the other major things that are going on in the in environmental thought are all going to be a big stuff in the coming year.